As the landscape shifts in the American political experience of 2024, it is clear that one voice will continue to have a major impact on the outcome of the November elections. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. simply will not go away as the major players wish he would. Months ahead of the time that people start to pay attention, he is within striking distance of the party leaders. He continues to raise money and have the attention of a great number of Americans. He is leading among self-described independents and with voters under the age of 40. He has the ear of people listening now, and once the primary season shakes out and the two major octogenarian candidates vanquish their competition, RFK is going to pick up momentum. Currently, the left and right have done nearly everything within their power to discredit him and push him to the sidelines. He's accused of being anti-science by the left and a socialist gun grabber by the right. Yet, if people take more than 10 seconds to listen, they will find that his thoughts are far more in line with a sane and rational position than that of the major candidates. Joe Biden has been bought and paid for by every major industry from here to Beijing. There isn't a war he doesn't love, or a payoff he can't filter through his business maestro Johnny Grazioni art-making son. He continues to act and look like the puppet he's been accused of, so he's either a placeholder for an early October surprise or he's exactly who the perma government wants. Either way, he appeals to nearly no one other than the party diehards and those being enriched by his abstention. Donald Trump was once the darling of the conservative wing of the country, but his self-evident failures on Operation Warp Speed, COVID, Summer of Violence, and his treatment of his opponents in the primary have left millions politically homeless. The party made sure that any resistance to Trump was pushed away during the months leading up to the primaries, and his myth-made persona alienated the rational people in conservatism. His demand for loyalty over any salient question has pushed many to wonder, is there an alternative to this? With the writing on the wall for the two-horse race the traditional media and conservative ink are pining for, I think there is wisdom in showcasing the actual words of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about his positions on the major issues of our time. Interestingly, the things that Mr. Kennedy speaks about are far more important to the daily lives of the people of America. They are the actual elements of what Trump coined the deep state, or what Kennedy frames as corporately captured agencies. The country needs an alternative choice. RFK is providing an incredible pathway for the Uniparty to lose their death grip on the Republic. His candidacy has validity regardless of anyone's personal affinity for him or lack thereof. The more voices we can encourage in politics, the more likely it is that the system will be exposed for its abuse of the American people. Listen closely to what he says. Then dive deeper if you don't trust this short-form edit. Find out if what is being presented is something you resonate with. The hope for the American experiment is to have the marketplace of ideas move the society towards the direction of liberty, and to do that without violence. Angry revolutions, more often than not, result in a furthering of the state and an abundance of bad actors. We need a voice oriented to peaceful transformation of our captured government. Mr. Kennedy is, if nothing more, compelling for his capacity to do this. On the environment.
I believe in free market economies. I believe if we had a true free market economy where we eliminated subsidies to people, we would not have the kind of environmental pollution problems that we have.
1960s and 1970s, environmentalism wasn't a politically divisive issue. Americans were unified in their desire to clean up pollution and protect nature. People across the political spectrum share that love of nature. And as president, I'm going to bring this country together by making my environmental policy all about people and places and community. I spent 40 years of my career as an environmental lawyer. I brought hundreds of cases against companies like Mobil and Exxon and Chevron and Texaco to restore the Hudson River. Today, the Hudson River is an international model for ecosystem protection. Battled all kinds of government agencies and giant corporations. These victories will set the tone for my environmental policy as president. My administration will protect America's wild places. We will rebuild America's soils. We will get toxic chemicals out of our water system, out of our food, out of our air. Very few people are inspired by a line on a graph that leads to an eventual apocalypse. Instead, I'm going to prioritize the goal that I hope all Americans share. We all, whether we're Republican or Democrat or Independent, want to protect our health, our children, our farmland, our wilderness areas. And we can do all that in a way that helps the climate too.
On the Second Amendment.
I am not going to take people's guns away, and I believe in gun control myself. So I also want to say this, that, you know, I have spent a lot of my life in rural communities in this country, and there is a gun culture in those communities that is closely tied to people's identity. People in my political party and people like myself say to them that we're going to take your guns away. And it hasn't worked. It has polarized our country more, and it's made people dig in more. And I'm trying to end the polarization in our country. We've seen an all-out assault on our Bill of Rights. So there's a lot of people in this country who are watching this happen and say our entire Constitution is under attack. The only provision that was not under attack is the Second Amendment. And a lot of the people who believe strongly about guns say, well, the reason they didn't attack the Second Amendment is because we have our guns. But going after people's guns at this point in history, to me, is just going to cause more polarization and make it so that we can't listen to each other anymore, because we get put into these kind of tribal silos which we have to somehow figure out a way to get past.
On fiat money, digital currency, and Bitcoin.
Fiat currency was created in order to enable nations to go to war without levying the taxes outright on populations. The population still pays for it, but pays through a stealth tax called inflation.
Right.
But fiat currency was invented long before the Fed.
Right.
And it was invented at the outset from the beginning in order to fund the cost of war. Well, my interest in Bitcoin began when I saw the truckers' strike, where you had peaceful demonstration of people who were exercising their right to protest and petition public officials for very, very good reasons. The government used surveillance techniques to determine their identities, to determine their license plates of their cars, and then close their bank accounts. If the government has the capacity to do that, the government has the capacity to enslave us. That freedom of transaction is as important as freedom of speech. See also the trajectory toward central bank digital currency.
Sure.
And the power that will give nations, this ultimate power over, whether we live or die ultimately.
Right.
And I understood that we need a currency that is a freedom currency,
right.
Currency that is independent and that can't be controlled by the government.
On war.
We have been immersed in a foreign policy discourse that is all about adversaries and threats and allies and enemies and domination. We've become addicted to comic book good versus evil narratives. We have internalized and institutionalized a reflex of violence as the response for any and all crises. Everything becomes a war. The war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on cancer, the war on climate change. This way of thinking predisposes us to wage endless wars abroad, wars and coups and bombs and drones and regime change operations. None of this has made us safer. Inhabiting the role of an enemy, we empower hardliners in places like Russia, China, Cuba, and Iran. We invite them into the drama of conflict. Is it any wonder that as America has waged violence throughout the world, violence has overtaken us in our own nation? We could not have warfare abroad without bringing that violence home to our streets, to our attitudes, to our communities. Waging endless wars abroad, we have neglected the foundation of our own well-being. These are the wages of war.
On housing.
The housing has been taken away, which was, if you have a house, you can get a loan and you can build a business. Housing is probably the most important issue in terms of building wealth. 2 years ago, the average cost of a house in this country was $215,000. Today it's $400,000. Why did the price of housing go up? Well, one, because of the inflation, because we spent $8 trillion on wars and $16 trillion on COVID, which we didn't have. So they print money, which caused the price of everything to go up. More importantly, there's 3 giant corporations: BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. But they also own 89% of the S&P 500. They've now decided to buy every single family home in America. They will own 60% of the homes in this country, single family homes, by 2030. The cost of money and interest to them is tiny. which means they can outcompete your children. One thing, I'm going to change the tax code to make it unprofitable for those companies to compete against your children for housing. Number two, I'm going to make a mortgage available to Americans at 3% interest. And I'm going to do that without raising the debt. I'll finance those mortgages by selling tax-free bonds on the open market. And those will only be available to first-time home buyers who will live in that community, who will work in that community.
On corporate capture.
Task of turning around that battleship almost on a dime.
I'm confident that I can do that, Judge, because I know, I've spent 40 years litigating against these agencies, and I understand the dynamics of agency capture. I understand the financial entanglements with the regulated industries that puts regulatory capture on steroids. And I also know the kind of reforms that you need to do to unravel agency capture at these agencies. And of course, the most captured agency is the CIA, which is now a functionary of the military-industrial complex's role. Trump came in and he promised to drain the swamp. He named me as head of the Vaccine Safety Commission. I met with Fauci, I met with Collins. When that news got out, Pfizer gave $1 million contribution to Trump, and Trump appointed two Pfizer's hand-picked candidates, Alex Azar, to run HHS, and Scott Gottlieb, who was a partner of Pfizer, to run FDA. Yep. And, Gottlieb came in there, did an $88 billion gift to Operation Warp Speed for Pfizer, and then left to join Pfizer's board and collect his payoff. So, that is the swamp.
On the border.
They're just waiting in line to cross. Hundreds and hundreds of people. It's about a half mile, and then they walk to the gap in the fence. It's the insanity of it. They're brought across, they're fingerprinted to see if they have criminal records. If they don't, they're asked one question by the Border Patrol: do you have a contact in this country? The Border Patrol asks them, if we put this family on an airplane, will you pick them up? And they take them to the airport. FEMA pays for their ticket, and they go anywhere they want in the country. 7 million people have come across. These are all people who intend to stay in this country. When they stay, they're given a court date 7 years from now. And meanwhile, there's 1 million immigrants who are legally coming here, go through the whole process, which could take them 8 or 10 years. And this is like a stick in the face for them. So, no country can survive if it can't control its borders, and we're not doing that. The good news is this, that this is easy to stop. You do need a physical barrier in certain places where there's high-density populations. The rest of it you can monitor with sophisticated surveillance and ground monitoring systems. Many of those were put up during the Trump administration. The Biden administration, when it came in, took down the towers. The flow has just increased exponentially. But we can stop it. We need to do it in a way that's sensible, that's common sense, and that is not causing this terrible, terrible humanitarian crisis we're creating through government negligence. And we need to end it for everybody's sake. And that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate, is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government, that they don't want people to hear. And that's antithetical to the values of our country. So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, where people apply pejoratives like anti-vax. I've never been anti-vaccine, but everybody in this room probably believes that I have been, because that's the prevailing narrative. Anti-Semitism, racism, these are the most appalling disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me, because people don't want me to have that conversation about the war, about groceries, about inflation, about the war on the middle class in this country that we need to be having. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify, to gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities.